Hi guys, and welcome back to part 2 of the most hated couple in France. If you haven't watched part 1, I highly recommend you catch up before you watch this video. Otherwise, believe me, it will make absolutely zero sense. I do have quite a lot to cover in this video. I have about 9 pages of research and script. So if you see me looking to the side, it's mostly because I am checking my notes. There is quite a lot of information to go through, and I just want to make sure that I don't forget anything. My camera has an hour and 11 minutes of battery, so I'm going to try and fit it all in. As a heads up, I will remind you that this video will have mentions of sexual abuse against children, violence, and pedophilia, as well as prostitution. So if these are topics you would like to stay far away from, this video is not for you. Neither is the first part of this video, so please watch neither. If you do want to know more about this case, watch the first one first. I will link it somewhere down below on screen, and I will wait for you, and then you can watch this part right now. I will try and briefly overview what happened in the first video just to jog your memory, though it won't do it justice. There's just so much to go through. It's quite a lot of detail. But Myriam Badaoui and Thierry Delay lived in the north of France with their 4 sons, and by the end of the year 2000, they had all been put in foster families because of the abuse they were going through at home. They were placed in separate foster families, but they all started sharing stories of what was going on at home, the sexual abuse they experienced growing up, and the general violence of their alcoholic father and the mother, who also often participated. They quickly started involving other adults, up to 40 adults I believe, and quite a few dozen children who were also victims just like them. And this case quickly gained a lot of traction due to the amount of people involved. Although Thierry Delay, the father, denied everything, the mother started confirming that the other adults mentioned by the children were implicated, were not innocent, and that what the children were telling police were not lies, they were telling the truth. She was corroborating a lot of those stories, and a lot of the children's stories lined up with some of the stories the adults gave. So some of the adults ended up confessing to certain acts or to other adults being implicated. Some of those stories lined up, so police were quite concerned. Most of the adults in this story denied any involvement, insisted they were innocent, but the next door neighbors, Aurélie Cronon and David Delplanque, confirmed that they had sexually assaulted the boys with their parents. Myriam Badaoui kept writing to the judge, Fabrice Burgot, the judge who was in charge of this entire case. From jail, she would write letters to him, many letters, giving more and more information, and most of what she said, again, confirmed what the children had said. They had mentioned a farm in Belgium where adults would organize and tape the orgies to sell the tapes. And because they mentioned Belgium, this was now becoming an international pedophile ring involving prostitution as well. Daniel Legrand Jr., who had been accused of sexually assaulting the boys between the ages of 15 and 19, denied everything before confessing to everything. 2 months later, in January 2002, he had spent 2 months in jail. He finally wrote a letter to the judge and told him he had seen Thierry Delay rape and murder a 6-year-old girl from Belgium, and he could no longer keep it a secret. The entire scene had allegedly been taped before it was destroyed and happened around the end of 1999, and the letter finally made its way to the press. So the letter that Daniel Legrand Jr. wrote to the judge made its way to the press, and the entire nation was outraged. This is where we left off. So the judge spoke to Daniel Legrand Jr. I will just be referring to him as Daniel Legrand. Unless I'm talking about his dad, I'll specify that. So the judge spoke to him in person before confronting Myriam Badaoui with this information. He wanted to get more information before speaking to her to see if she could confirm what had happened in the letter. She seemed to be the most willing to talk, obviously. She'd shared quite a lot of information over the months, but instead of the judge asking her about something that could have happened to a little girl or around the end of 1999, instead of asking some questions maybe to have her share this, he decided to read the letter to her, which is A controversial move because he was basically giving her all of the information and asking her whether or not it was true instead of asking for her version to see if it matched the one in the letter. She confirmed the story. She gave a very detailed account of what happened to the girl. I mean, she went into severe detail and it made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Like, honestly, very uncomfortable. One lady actually ended up passing out because she was so shocked by what Myriam Badaoui was saying, and she made the mistake of like picturing her own daughter in that scenario. She ended up passing out. That's just how awful it was. She described the pajamas the girl was wearing, her hairstyle, the scenes of horror, and she knew people were uncomfortable, but she just kept going. She told them that the little girl had been raped by François Mourmont, who was the ex-partner of Monique Foucault that I mentioned in the first video, and that Thierry Delay beat her to death before burying her in a garden near her house. Now, Thierry Delay so far has denied everything, but also hasn't said much. He hasn't shared anything, obviously, because he's denying any involvement in this entire affair. But he was watching TV in his cell when he found out that his wife had been telling the judge lies upon lies. He finally wrote to the judge to tell him that Myriam Badaoui had been lying the whole time, that none of the other adults accused were guilty. The whole thing was a lie. Basically, he was saying that none of the children have ever been assaulted, including his own, even though there's solid medical evidence of that, and that everyone is innocent. This entire thing is just made up by the children, and for whatever reason, Myriam Badaoui is running with it. Thierry also wrote to his wife and told her he would never forgive her for lying. He said, "You have made me suffer and I won't hold back. It'll be your word against mine." So he's ready to fight her in court. Meanwhile, police have to obviously look into this murder story. They start digging up the gardens to try and find the body of the little girl mentioned in the letter. And they kept digging and digging and they found absolutely nothing. People in the neighborhood found it weird that they would dig in such a public place, because how could anyone have brought a little girl and like dug a hole big enough to bury her without anyone seeing? Like, so many neighbors around is very unusual, obviously very unlikely. Two of the Delay boys confirmed the story and were asked to individually point out where the body was, but they each pointed to separate parts of the garden. Both areas were searched, but unfortunately nothing came of it. No body was ever found. Additionally, there were no missing girls in Belgium that fit her description, so they actually didn't know who the little girl was, the alleged girl in the letter. Meanwhile, Daniel Legrand, who had written the letter, switched lawyers, and that's when he finally dropped a bomb. He had made the entire thing up. Nothing in the letter was true. There was no little girl, no murder, nothing at all. He basically wanted to see if Myriam Badaoui would confirm his story to prove she was a liar. And he also added that he only confessed to the crimes he was accused of because he thought that if he confessed to something, he would get to go home just like Aurélie Grenon, who had confessed to having sexually assaulted the Delay children and her own, and she still got to go home instead of being placed in custody until the trial. Daniel said that basically he was under the impression that if he confessed to something, he would also get to walk, which is why he confessed to everything. Now, the judge was obviously devastated by this revelation. This throws a huge wrench in the entire investigation, but Myriam Badaoui doubled down. She insisted a little girl had been murdered, and the boys also insisted. They were adamant that this happened. It's very important to note that Thierry Delay's phone conversations to his own mom confirmed that he did drive the kids up to Belgium to make some money, and that he was nervous because now he was accused of prostituting, is that a word, his own kids on top of, incest and sexual assault. It's bad enough that he's doing that, and now he's being accused of bringing his kids abroad to another country to make money off of them. And there was no mention of murder in the phone calls, but he kept denying any involvement, even though there are phone calls to prove that he confessed to his own mother. I cannot explain to you how big this case got. Everybody in the nation and in Belgium was shook by the revelations. Like, people were genuinely horrified by what they were hearing. And it also became a very, very controversial case, still is, since a lot of people believed the children, but unfortunately a lot of people believed that the children were lying. So you were either on team children or team adults, basically. Lawyers started popping out of nowhere to get involved in this case, mostly to join the defense team. Not many people fought to defend the children, but a lot of lawyers came out of nowhere, basically wanting to be involved in the case of the decade for sure, possibly one of the cases of the century. That's how big it was. By this point, police have officially arrested Myriam Badaoui, Thierry Delay, Aurélie Grenon, David Delplanque, Roselyne and Christian Godard, Alain et Odile Maréco, Karine Duchauchois and David Brunet, Thierry Dosque, Dominique Viel, Pierre Martel, Sandrine and Franck Lavier, and Daniel Legrand Jr. and Sr. The judge, Fabrice Burgot, who was in charge of this entire case, as I've said, got promoted to a different sector in anti-terrorism. But since obviously this whole case was still going on, like the instruction wasn't finished yet, the trial hadn't started, he was still involved and responsible, but in the meantime, he got a job elsewhere working for anti-terrorism while the investigation kept going. Now in July 2002, François Mourmont, who was accused of having raped the little girl prior to her murder, is found dead in his cell. He had been screaming his innocence for a long time, and the autopsy revealed that he died of suicide or medical error. This is highly debated. They couldn't figure out if he had made a mistake with the amount of medication he was taking, or if this was voluntary, or if this was deliberate. But they pretty much excluded foul play, which a lot of people disagree with. A lot of people believe that he was given the wrong amount of medication on purpose. His family tried to figure out how and why he passed away because they did not believe it was suicide. They believed it was something more sinister and that someone just wanted him dead. I mean, obviously nobody likes pedophiles, especially in prison. It was established that his death was non-criminal, meaning that he had either killed himself or took the incorrect amount of medicine. Either way, it was basically his fault. That's what they were saying, and that no foul play was happening. I don't know what happened, but to this day, a lot of people think that it wasn't suicide or just an error. The trial began on May 4th, 2004, and grab a coffee, sit down, you're gonna need a couple of seats for this one. The case files were 30,000 pages long, and the main accusations were aggravated sexual assault and rape in combination with cruelty. Torture/cruelty. 18 children between the ages of 3 and 12 were accusing 17 adults of assault. Now, only 15 children showed up in court, and the children had 2 lawyers to represent them, while the defendants had 19. 17 adults got 19 lawyers who pretty much elbowed each other out of the way to be involved in this case, while the children, 12 children, had 2 lawyers. By the time the trial came around, the adults who had confessed to having participated in these awful acts or who had implicated other adults all went back on their word and retracted their confessions. Everyone except Aurélie Grenon, David Delplanque, so the next door neighbors, and Myriam Badaoui. Thierry Delay still denied any involvement in this affair, even though most of the evidence points against him. This was a gigantic trial that lasted 2 months, and I've tried to break down the trial in chunks so that it makes some sort of sense. I've tried to break it down by theme. So I'll start with Myriam Badaoui, who everyone considered basically the cornerstone of this entire case because she was the one who accused all these people. Like, she was corroborating all of the children's stories. She was out there writing letters to the judge, pointing her finger at everyone else. So without her, this case might not have been this, might not have been this massive. Now, during the trial, Myriam Badaoui started talking about her past again. I believe she did want to provide context, and if you've watched the first video, you would know she has a very fucked up past, a very, very, very problematic past. She started talking about what had been going on at home with the children, basically started explaining the sexual abuse, the violence, the drinking, everything. And she was confronted with the fact that what she had done herself was awful. because she's not innocent in all of this. Just because she's helping name people doesn't mean she hasn't done anything bad. And people did try to point it out. They basically like, sorry, do you realize what you're saying is absolutely horrendous and you participated in this? And her answer was basically like, yeah, I know, you know, but like over time you kind of just get used to it. Like, you know, it's just, I don't know, very nonchalant. Like she refused to answer anyone who wasn't like the president of the court, like the main judge. She felt like lawyers might try and trick her with their questions, so she would only respond to the main man in charge. So whenever they would ask a question, she's like, excuse me, I'm not answering your questions, he can ask me. And whenever she felt like someone was confronting her or trying to clarify some of her statements, she would be very, very quick to like interrupt them, stand up. See, she would sometimes grab the microphone, like shout, you were there, you raped my children, like threw the microphone on the ground. Very dramatic. She basically had quite a bit of a temper, or like she would throw tantrums basically on a whim. It was a wild case, like a wild trial. Now Thierry Delay, on the other hand, said absolutely nothing. He just let his wife look like a lunatic on the stand. It was very easy. He didn't have to do anything. He just had to let her do her thing. And since he had denied all accusations, he really didn't have much to do or say, because the whole time he said, I've done none of this. When it was his turn to answer the question, did you sexually assault your own children? He said yes, which stopped the whole trial. Like everyone in the room just stopped for a second. They could not believe it, because after 3 years of denial, he finally confessed to having like assaulted his kids, and he insisted that it was just his own kids who were involved, none of the other kids, so just his 4 sons. And that only 4 adults were involved: his wife, Myriam Badaoui, and the next door neighbors, Aurélie Grenon and David Delplanque, and himself. After Thierry Delay confessed to this, David Delplanque confirmed that it was only ever the 4 of them, and that he shouldn't have accused the other 13, because he was part of the group who accused other adults. And he regretted it. He said he shouldn't have accused these people. They didn't say anything. He was following what Thierry Delay had said. Sorry, editing me. I just wanted to specify I made a mistake. I meant David Delplanque had been repeating what Myriam Badaoui had been saying, not Thierry Delay, because Thierry Delay had just been saying he was innocent the whole time. So I just wanted to clarify that. He hadn't been repeating what Thierry Delay had said. I hope that helps. However, Aurélie Grenon, his partner at the time, kept the same energy as Myriam Badaoui. She did not go back on her statements. She said, no, all these other adults are involved. It wasn't just these kids. The 2 women basically kept their accusations, whereas both men just kind of said, no, it's just the 4 of us and the 4 kids. Myriam confessed that they made a lot of money off of the children. There are some rumors about maybe charging like $500, like an entrance fee, something like that. That's something I read. I don't know if that's true, but basically she said that they made quite a lot of money off of the children, and that's how they could afford their lifestyle, since they didn't get benefits anymore. Once their kids were in foster care, they needed to make some money. Last minute, as the trial was happening, the defense lawyers decided to bring in over 150 witnesses. I don't even know 150 people. They brought 150 people, witnesses, to take the stand and defend their family members and friends. They hadn't been planned, obviously. It created just chaos, absolute chaos, given the amount of people who were now attending. They had to be called out like from a hallway. Someone had to shout their name to come forward. But it did intrigue a lot of people, because now they're seeing just how many people showed up to support these 17 adults, to defend them, to say, I know these people, this is my dad, this is my friend, this is my brother, or this is my mom, just to basically attest to their character. And people started to think, wow, well, these people do have a career and children of their own. People started to doubt how guilty the adults were, basically, because obviously if they were that bad, then surely they wouldn't have that many people come forward to defend them. The defense argued that when social workers and therapists were interviewing the kids at the beginning, they used very suggestive language, meaning that instead of asking neutral questions and seeing what the kids answered, they would ask leading questions, which is why the children came up with these stories and these lies, So basically the defense tried to invalidate all of the children's testimonies, and the lawyers obviously tried to portray Myriam Badaoui as a lunatic and a liar, which people didn't have a hard time believing just because of the way she acted herself. They also said that she was infatuated with the judge. They basically said that she was obsessed with him, that she felt important, she felt like she finally got the attention she never got growing up or in her relationship, and she kept writing him letters and she loved the way he made her feel, and that's why she kept feeding him stories to keep his attention. Now, it is a bit too easy to make her sound crazy and like basically say, well, she's kind of nuts, like let's ignore all of her confessions and accusations, when there is so much evidence in the files that doesn't rely on her testimonies. But they were hoping to basically make people forget about the 30,000 pages that were in the case files. They were basically hoping that people would kind of forget the evidence and just focus on Myriam's character and the children's testimonies and basically debunk those instead of facing the evidence that was in the case files. The people who were familiar with what was in the case files would know that even without the children testimonies, the adults had accused each other anyway. So even if you wanted to claim that you can't trust the children, you would still have enough documentation proof from the adults who implicated each other. In the files, you could clearly see that 5 children from 2 different families whose parents were being accused had reports from the doctors as having suffered sexual assault. Additionally, 3 of the adults had involved each other without speaking to each other previously, so they had all implicated each other separately when being interviewed or interrogated, and confessed to police in detail. 4 children and 3 adults who haven't had time to speak to each other beforehand confirmed the involvement of another adult. So that's what's in the case files, but obviously didn't look very good for the adults. So the defense basically tried to focus on Myriam Badaoui's character. The children were finally brought to the stand. Now it's very, very questionable the fact that they were brought to the stand because they're so young. And it is very intimidating. I mean, they were just expected to walk up there. People wearing robes, and I don't know if they were wearing wigs. I don't know if that's a thing in France, but definitely wearing robes. It's very intimidating. There's a huge crowd there. They had to answer some very serious questions. And like their own family is, you know, somewhere in the court, and it's hard as a kid to like go against that, even as an adult. The children were terrified to face the court. They were so young. They had no idea how the trial was going to pan out. They went in blind. Nobody prepared them. No one said, like, this is what's going to happen. And while waiting for their turn to take the stand, they had to wait in a room with police officers and no one else. And because they're all underage, their names had to be private. They had to be kept under very, high security, just to make sure they were safe. The layout of the room, like the courtroom, was so messed up, and a lot of people were like, well, it's just because it was so crowded, we had to change it up. But I don't think that's what happened. The children had to sit where the accused usually sit, and the accused, because there were 17 of them, had to sit in the section facing the judge. So like the general section in the middle. The children had 2 lawyers who couldn't sit next to them because they had to sit where the accused were. They couldn't sit next to the lawyer. The lawyers would be like kind of lower down, so they couldn't get reassurance from them. And Myriam Badaoui was 2 meters away from the children, so especially when it was the time for the Delay children to testify and take the stand, it was so hard for them to be so close to the person they're accusing and the person who ruined their lives. And, the rest of the people they've accused are not much farther away. So the whole layout was messed up. That's a fact. A lot of people agree with that. A lot of people just say, look, that's just how it was just too busy. We had to change the layout. But in that case, they should have just stopped and gone for a bigger room somewhere else. That's just my solution to it. Like, that's just a thing. But I feel like that's what should have happened. Out of the 15 children who showed up to court, 3 of them retracted their confessions and said that they had lied because they wanted to match their friends' stories. But the 12 remaining children did not waver. They did not flip the script. Their accusations were still the same no matter what. Unfortunately, a lot of the children did stay quiet did not speak up when taking the stand because they were very intimidated. It's very understandable. One of the girls claimed she had been raped by 3 men at the same time, but apparently the medical examiner confirmed that she was still a virgin. So a lot of people were like, well, how is that possible? Some of the confessions and details from the children didn't quite add up. One of them accused Roselyne Godard of having killed her husband with a shovel, which was impossible because she was in court with her husband. So it's frustrating because I'm not sure if the accusations that didn't add up were from the 3 children who withdrew their confessions, or if one of the 12 children said that. But aside from that, all of the other stories did stay the same. The defense lawyers would often shout and scream, especially Morel. Hi guys, editing me again. I'm so sorry, I meant Dupont-Moretti. His name is not Morel. I don't know where I got that from. I just made it up. That's not his name. His name is Dupont-Moretti. I'll put his picture here. I don't know if he's currently the Minister of Justice in France. He's a very controversial figure. A lot of people don't like him. I don't know much about him, to be completely honest, but he was known as the acquittador, basically because he gets people acquitted all of the time. He was famous for getting people acquitted, and it was basically wild, wild west. Like the 19 lawyers just kind of ran with it. The Delay children were also confronted by their mother, who tried to apologize. The younger boys, Dimitri, Jonathan, and Dylan, had a harder time keeping it together because, again, they were like under the age of 10. But Sherif, the eldest, made sure to tell her that he no longer considered her his mother and that he would never ever forgive her for what she's done. Very unexpectedly, on May 18th, 2004, so just 2 weeks after the trial began, Myriam Badaoui took it all back. She told the court that all of the adults accused have done nothing wrong. She'd lied, basically. It was only the couple next door and herself and her husband, Thierry Delay, and then it was just the Delay children involved. So she basically took it all back and then decided to join her husband's version. She claimed that no other children had been sexually assaulted and she knew she had lied and it was bad, but instead of taking accountability, she just blamed the judge because he gave her a level of attention that she had never experienced in her life. And in order to keep feeling important, she kept lying and lying, basically. So basically she kind of went with the story that the defense lawyers were trying to say. Like, she lied because she wanted the judge's attention, and she basically kind of ended up saying, actually, yeah, that is what happened. Aurélie Grenon, hearing this, actually finally confessed that Myriam was correct and that the other adults had nothing to do with this. They were falsely accused, and she didn't stop there. She added that she and her partner, David Delplanque, who had confessed previously, had never touched any kids at all. They'd never done anything inappropriate. Definitely not their own children, definitely not the Delay children. But David Delplanque took the stand and said, no, we definitely sexually assaulted these children. She's very much involved. She's not getting off the hook for this, which was very interesting because he could technically have gone back on his confession to like trying to save his own skin, but he was like, nah, we did that. When Myriam Badaoui recanted her confessions, she said, I lied. I am very sick. I made it all up and they're all innocent. She even turned around and started asking people for forgiveness, like the people she accused for 3 years. She turned around and said, oh, I always wanted you as my father, or I'm sorry, I don't even know you. I don't know why I brought you into this. It was just a bit wild, obviously. Like, it was a very, very intense moment for the court. Like, it was very high on emotion because after 3 years of all these accusations, she was finally taking it all back. So the adults were like, finally, she's, you know, from their point of view, she's telling the truth, because, you know, they kept saying they were innocent. The following day, the defense lawyers demanded that all of the adults who had been unjustly accused be set free. They had already spent 3 years in jail, which is wild. They had spent 3 years in jail, and they didn't even get released immediately. Now, oddly enough, 6 days later, Myriam Badaoui took everything back and accused them all over again. Her lawyer believed that basically she realized that by saying that the adults were innocent, she was basically saying her children had been lying the whole time. And her lawyer believes that she couldn't live with that because she knew her children had been victims, at least by her own hand and her husband's hand. And yeah, so her lawyer believed that that's why she went back on her word again. What was so shocking about the whole case, aside from like everything, is that there was so much writing on her word, like on Myriam Badaoui. Like everything was writing on what she was saying. Like let's forget what the kids have to say or the evidence in the case files. Let's forget the 30,000 pages. Everybody called her a liar. They were more than happy to believe her when she exonerated all the adults, but still called her a liar. And then when she took it back, she was still a liar again. So it was very strange, basically. They kind of decided to pick when they felt like she was a liar. It's frustrating. It's almost as if the children's confessions and testimonies were kind of worthless in all of this, because all it took was for her to say, actually no, for the verdict to change, basically. By May 27th, 2004, all of the accused were released, but not yet acquitted or judged. The trial was still going on. The accused who had been declared innocent by Myriam Badaoui basically got to leave jail and go home until the end of the trial. To be fair, they had already spent 3 years in jail while like innocent until proven guilty. So a very, very controversial choice to have them in jail for so long when we still didn't know if they had assaulted the children or not. The judge, Fabrice Burgot, was brought in for questioning. Obviously, he was under severe scrutiny because a lot of people said that he was too young when he got the case. He completely mishandled it. There was a lot of criticism because of his relationship with Myriam Badaoui, which he didn't have one. She just wrote him a lot of letters and he like took them seriously because you can't just not. Overall, they didn't have that much to say about the case files, the case itself, or how he did his job. For a year and a half, the lawyers only intervened 5 times when they were unhappy with something the judge had done regarding the case. I mean, they had a year and a half to prepare for this case. If he had done anything questionable or problematic, they would have said like, no, you can't do that, which they did 5 times. They came up to him and said, no, we can't do this. So overall, they were happy with how the rest of the case was handled, and now they're kind of taking it back, being like, you ruined this, you mishandled this case. He got a lot of shade for showing up in a very big security convoy as if he was the president himself. And people were like, what do you need all this security for? But at the time he was working for anti-terrorism, and that was the procedure for transporting him around. So he wasn't just trying to be flashy or anything. That's just how things were. Apparently that was the procedure, so that's what happened. Again, people question his relationship as in, like, I'm not saying romantic, but his relationship with Myriam Badaoui. Because of the attention he gave her, he was questioned for 7 hours. Overall, he stood by his methods and decisions. From his point of view, he listened to the children, he listened to the people who came forward, and looked into all of those avenues, and based on the evidence and confessions he was given, he acted accordingly. And yeah, if he had made any mistakes in the case files, they would easily sanction him, but they didn't. So yeah, it was a bit of a weird one, but if there'd been a serious mistake, they would have pointed it out way earlier while the trial was being prepared. As I've said, the trial lasted 2 months, and the defense lawyers obviously had a very strong strategy, making sure that all of the defendants came together to deny all of the accusations. Obviously, all of them except Myriam Badaoui, Thierry Delay, and the next door neighbors. They made use of the media. They would speak to the journalists, TV crews about how the case was going. The prosecutor himself refused to say anything to the press because obviously this was a case that involved minors. You're not really, like, you need to protect them, but also you shouldn't be discussing a case until it's closed. So they only, like, people through media only saw one side of the story, kind of. So they saw the accused cry and share their stories, and it kind of changed their opinion. Obviously, you know, it did affect mine, because if you look at the footage, you'd feel bad. Like, these adults were in jail for 3 years, waiting to find out if people would judge whether or not they just sexually assaulted children. Like, they had families, they had kids, they had careers, they had houses. A lot of people ended up homeless, lost their spouse, their family, their kids. The kids were taken away, put in foster care. They lost their entire careers, so a lot of them had their lives entirely ruined. So obviously, yeah, seeing that on TV, a lot of people started thinking that they were the new victims, actually. Like, actually, they felt bad for the adults. How could you not? And they wondered how anyone could have believed these kids the whole time. They're like, damn, these kids really ruined these people's lives. And based on what they'd seen on TV, the public, the general public, who wasn't attending court, genuinely believed that everyone would be acquitted aside from the main four. Just before they announced the verdict, Myriam Badaoui said, "You will never know when I'm lying or when I'm telling the truth." Fantastic. After 15 hours of deliberation, on July 12th, 2004, all 12 children were found victims of sexual assault and rape. They were each granted 30,000 euros upon their 18th birthday. Thierry Delay, who I would argue is the main protagonist in this nightmare of a case, Myriam Badaoui gets all of the heat and the attention. She is deemed the most hated woman in France because she was so involved, but realistically, I would argue that Thierry Delay is possibly the worst perpetrator in this affair in terms of abuse, assault, and violence. He received a 20-year sentence for rape, sexual assault, corruption of a minor, and prostitution, so pimping. Like, he wasn't prostituting himself, he was selling his children. Myriam Badaoui got 15 years for the same charges as her husband. David Delplanque got 6 years for rape and sexual assault, whereas Aurélie Grenon got 4 years for the same charges. Daniel Legrand Jr., who had written that letter, got 3 years for indecent assault on minors. Dominique Viel, the priest or abbot, got 7 years for rape and sexual assault on minors. Alain Maréchaux got 18 months. Thierry Dosque, 4 years. Franck Lavier, 6 years for the rape of his stepdaughter. Sandrine Lavier got 3 years for corruption of minors against her own children. But 7 of them were acquitted. Karine Duchauchois, her partner David Brunet, Christian and Roselyne Godard, Daniel Legrand Sr., and Pierre Martel and Odile Maréchaux. All 6 of the accused appealed their sentencing immediately, so basically everyone except the Delay couple and Aurélie Grenon and David Delplanque, who neither of the 4 ever appealed their sentence. Roughly a year later, on November 7th, 2005, the trial for the appeal began. Now, this was just over a year after. Quite quick. Contrary to how the first trial started, this one made it seem like the odds were in the favor of the adults, because obviously Myriam Badaoui had already pretty much exonerated everyone by confessing that she had lied before taking it all back. Now, she was clearly a liar and a manipulator who was out to ruin people's lives, and because of that, the public was ready to see those 6 adults as victims instead of perpetrators. Additionally, a lot of them wrote books. This is one of the cases that has the most books written about it by so many different perspectives. But they did interviews, they went on TV, that really helped with their image. I'm not judging this case, and I'm not giving my point of view on who I think is guilty or not. It's not my place, but I'm just saying, obviously, going on TV and sharing your story will obviously help your case. Most of the time, they got to share their stories, so people got to see what was going on with them. And if you do watch their interviews, you definitely would have a hard time believing they could ever be involved in this. But it's important to know that the children didn't get a chance to go on TV and do interviews and share their side of the story because they were all minors. So it might have tipped the scales maybe more like halfway if the children got to go on TV. Now, this time around, the children really didn't stand a chance. The entire trial was very criticized because the defense lawyers kept interrupting the children when they were talking. They wouldn't let them finish their stories when they took the stand. They made so many jokes about their testimonies, like the children would go up and talk about how they were assaulted. It was very disgusting. At one point, they asked the children if aliens hadn't also sexually assaulted them. And a lot of people laughed at that, like, oh wow, they're really making all of this up. So they just joked it up about oh, did aliens also assault you? Just, I don't know, I wonder if people attended that trial and were like, what the fuck? Like, I would be furious if I heard that. Anyway, the jury would laugh whenever the children came to speak. They were asking very disrespectful questions, and over time, the children basically just shut down. They stopped answering questions because obviously you're getting shouted over and people are laughing. Like, obviously, like, even as an adult, I'd probably just be like, fuck it, I'm not answering anymore. A lot of the jury believed that because the children stopped talking, they were going back on their word and they had lied, basically, when that's not really the case. To make things worse, the psychologist who evaluated all of the children initially, before the first trial, was accused of being partial to the victims because she was their own personal therapist. Now, this was a lie, but you couldn't quickly double check whether or not that was true. So because of that, the defense team tried to have her no longer involved in the case. And basically her evaluation of the children was biased, so they couldn't use it. So they brought in another psychologist to evaluate the children. However, she confirmed what the first one had said. And the lawyers tried to disqualify her expertise and evaluation as well. They did everything they could to destabilize the children. And the second psychologist, the one who was asked to start all over because the first one was involved when she wasn't even questioned at the stand. They didn't even bring her up. The judge read her, not Fabrice Burgot, another judge, read her evaluation while laughing, and the defense lawyers laughed as well. Like, you asked for her, you just don't like what she said. The next move for the defense team was to bring in a psychiatrist as a witness, Dr. Bensoussan, who was a witness. He had to come in as a witness instead of as a psychiatrist involved in the case, because he never actually spoke to the children or evaluated them. But this man took the stand and said that the children had made it all up due to the trauma and abuse they went through, so they would implicate other people and lie about all of this because of the lack of affection they got growing up. And I repeat, this man has never spoken to the children. He never got a chance to evaluate them firsthand. He just took the stand and his opinion as a professional, as a psychiatrist from far away. He's like, these kids are lying because they grew up without any love. They grew up in an abusive, family, so that's why they're lying. Now, I will add that Myriam Badaoui had written multiple letters to Dominique Viel, the priest, when she was in custody. While she was in custody, she was basically asking him to look after the flat and the plants. And in one of the letters, so this was before he was brought in, before he was mentioned by her and brought in for questioning. In one of the letters, she talked about what had been going on, the abuse that was going on inside their house, and how he had no way of knowing that this was happening because they kept it very secret. So she was basically in her letters confirming that he couldn't have known. And he couldn't have been involved if he didn't know the children were being abused, right? So she basically had already exonerated him in those letters before she accused him, if that makes sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean? Like, she had already written that in the letters before she brought him up. However, he did go on to write a book. And in his book, he claimed that none of the kids were abused by anyone, like not even the Delay parents. Which is very confusing because then in that case, if you did get a letter saying, well, you couldn't have known about the abuse going inside the house because we kept it secret and you weren't there, how can you possibly take that as evidence and then still say that there was no abuse? Very odd. Don't get me wrong, she's obviously, again, a liar and a manipulator, but very, very odd. On December 1st, 2005, the prosecutor had asked the jury to not deliberate for longer than 3 hours because he wanted the verdict to be shared on the news at 1 o'clock, like 1 p.m., like the noon news. Wild. Like, you don't get to say, you have maximum 3 hours to deliberate because this needs to be on the news at 1 o'clock. But that's how big the case was. People wanted to know. People were so invested in this case. It's kind of like the whole country watching Casey Anthony's verdict, They ended up taking longer. At 8 p.m. on the evening news, they announced the acquittal of the 6 accused. So all 6 adults got acquitted. They got up to 550,000 euros per person, even though their own children were some of the children recognized as victims, which confused a lot of people. How can you have 12 children confirmed as victims, but all of the adults acquitted? Now, to be fair, acquitted does not mean you're not guilty. It doesn't mean you're innocent, but it still confused a lot of people, myself included. Once the appeal was done, people quickly accused Fabrice Burgot of believing everything Myriam Badaoui had said, that she had him wrapped around her finger, and he ruined lives by putting the accused in jail for the entire length of the investigation. Now, that was something a lot of people were angry about. Out of all the things they should be angry about, they were, fair enough, very angry about the fact that all these people who ended up being acquitted spent 3 years in jails and their entire lives were ruined, some of them up to 4 years. But they all blamed the judge, even though that was not a decision that was up to the judge. It was never up to him to decide how long they would spend in jail or in custody. So I think they just, because all the children were deemed victims, right? All the adults were acquitted, aside from the main 4. People wanted to blame someone for how this case had gone. Like, this trial had gone so wrong, so obviously the judge was the last scapegoat, really. And I'm not saying he didn't make any errors, right, at all. I don't know anything about law, I'm just sharing the facts, but it wasn't up to him to have these people sit in jail for 3 to 4 years. So they ended up investigating over 200 people involved in the case. The judge was interrogated for 7 hours. He was expected to give a detailed account of what happened 4 years ago, 4 years prior, without any access to documents or files. And they're like, yes or no, did you do this? He's like, this was 4 years ago. I can't even tell you what I did last week. He did admit that the conditions under which he was working were very difficult, considering the fact that this case was very, very brutal and also involved so many children who had been sexually assaulted and tortured. Overall, again, he stood by his work, by his decisions, but this also wasn't the first case he was working on involving pedophilia or sexual assault against children. Most of his cases at the time revolved around that. I don't know if he was working in a specific section of, children's law, I'm not sure. So unfortunately, that does give you an idea of just how common this is, which a lot of people refuse to believe. Myriam Badaoui wrote to her son, Cherif, all of the time from prison, asking how he is and telling him what she's up to in jail, which obviously he did not give a flying fuck about. He only reached out to her to get information on his biological father in Algeria, so he could hopefully get in touch with him and get to know him and his older sister. After the first trial, the children were kept separate, placed in different orphanages. They had a very rough childhood, even though it was obviously still better than what they had at home with their parents. I know Jonathan was homeless for a while. Basically, the second they turned 18, at midnight, they turned 18, got kicked out of the foster homes or the orphanage, and they were left to their own devices. Now, they did get 30,000 euros each upon turning 18. I don't think any of them had the tools to invest. I don't think anyone was given a course on how to succeed at 18, being left to your own devices. And most of them saw this as dirty money. You know, you got 30,000 euros because you were sexually assaulted. So it didn't sit right with them. He ended up spending most of it helping others. He was quickly broke and homeless. And even though they all seem to be doing better now, they all seem to be somewhat on their feet. They're settled. They obviously have to live through their childhood trauma, and it doesn't disappear or go away. And they still want to try and fight for their justice. So again, a lot of people ended up writing books. Dominique Viel, the priest, wrote a book where he again said that the children had lied about their own parents abusing them, even though the adults confessed, all 4 of them, and that there is serious medical evidence to prove that the children had been sexually abused. He basically said that Cherif and Dimitri, the 2 eldest, started the rumors and the lies, and that the other kids followed suit. In 2011, Cherif Badaoui wrote a book called I Am Standing, and he discussed his entire childhood, the case, the abuse, and how difficult it was for him to be an adult in society after all of this. Most of the children, the Delay children, have done interviews. You can watch them. They are in French, unfortunately. And they are absolutely heartbreaking. They all seem like really nice kids. They're adults now, but they're very difficult to watch. This case, again, massive case, changed the law. Like, it changed quite a few things regarding trials and the law. So as a result of this judicial, that is so hard. As a result of this fiasco, there now had to be 3 judges involved to avoid a repeat of this situation. So because the judge was accused of being swayed by Myriam Badaoui, now there are 3 judges instead of just 1. And the length of time the accused spend in prison while waiting for a trial has been lessened, amongst other changes to the law, most of them very tedious and boring that I won't mention just because they're not massive, they're just small changes to the law. In September 2011, Myriam Badaoui got out of jail early, and she was forbidden from speaking publicly about the case for a whole year. Now this is interesting. In the first video, I told you to remember Franck Lavier. He was initially dismissed because his children told police that he hadn't done anything, but Myriam Badaoui had said no, he's beating his own kids and assaulting his own kids. In February 2012, Franck Lavier and Sandrine Lavier, so this couple, were sentenced to 10 years in jail for repeated violence on their children. There was actual footage of them as well, completely drunk at a party and naked and simulating sexual acts, and their children were also attending that party. Both children had obvious signs of physical abuse. They had tried running away a few times, and once he got sentenced for that, he basically said that he admitted to having disciplined his kids, but not for pleasure and not in the way people think. But he ended up going to jail with his wife. On May 18th, 2015, Daniel Legrand Jr., who had been sentenced to 3 years for indecent assault on minors, got sentenced again, but this time it was for the acts he had committed while he was underage. So basically, he was accused of sexually assaulting the Delay children between the ages of 15 and 19, but during those trials, he was only sentenced for what he had done between the ages of 18 and 19, so as an adult. So he never got tried for the ages while he was a minor. So that was what this case was about in 2015. He maintained he was innocent. The Delay boys said that they were not trying to ruin his life. They insisted that he actually was a victim before becoming a perpetrator. And they basically just wanted him to tell the truth, basically. That's what the Delay children wanted. Of course, Daniel kept saying he was innocent. On June 5th, he got acquitted of those charges as well. On June 8th, 2016, Franck Lavier, again, the one and only, who had recently been jailed for violence against his own children, is taken to court for sexually assaulting his own daughter. She was 17 at the time, and she finally came forward to report the sexual abuse that had been going on at home. What do you know? In August 2019, Myriam Badaoui got sentenced to 8 months in jail for violent robbery of a vulnerable person for check fraud, I think, and check fraud, one of the two. I can't remember if this was the violent robbery. I think it was trying to steal a check from that person, a checkbook maybe. I'll put in the description down below just to confirm. I don't have the full notes here, so I'll double check and confirm in the description box, sorry. On March 6th, 2020, so very recently, lockdown mode, Thierry Delay was back in court and sentenced for sexual assault. Now, he had been out of jail since 2016 because he had multiple sclerosis, so he was put in a hospital. So it's not like he got released, but he was put in a hospital instead of jail because of his multiple sclerosis, and that's where the sexual assault happened. He attacked a disabled woman in a hospital, so he got sentenced again for sexual assault. Chérif Delay has since moved to Senegal. He has written rap songs about his experience. I'm not sure if he still lives there. I genuinely wish all 4 children and the other children involved the best. It looks like all of the adults who had been accused have moved on as well. Most of them have written books. That's all the information I have gathered about this case. Now, I do want to remind you, I have done my best. This is such a big case to get all of the information. I sincerely apologize if I've missed anything out, and someone can point it out, I will pin a comment down below, right? This is just information I've gathered for your entertainment slash education, obviously. I've done my best. I hope it's enough. I hope I've done this case justice, because I feel like this case didn't fully get justice. I just wanted to talk about what happened in Outreau 20 years ago. I won't really give you my opinion on this case. At the end of the day, justice has been served, regardless of how I feel about the outcome. I also don't want to get in trouble, but I will say that over time, this is my observation from the comment sections on the interviews from the children, right? This is from what I've observed. It looks like many adults who lived through both trials have changed their minds, right? I saw a lot of comments saying that at the time, they genuinely thought the adults were innocent based on the interviews they did on TV, and now it seems like a lot of them have changed their minds. Now that the children have become adults and have also done their own interviews, they now believe the children. I have watched all of the interviews. It's hard to tell. Like, there's not a single interview where I feel like someone's a piece of garbage, aside from Myriam Badaoui and Thierry Delay. Aside from that, from the interviews alone, it's hard to tell. You can't decide from an interview, obviously. People do love to use this case to say that the children's confessions and stories have been prioritized, and people put too much emphasis on the children's word, and basically said that, it was gospel, like, oh, whatever the children say, we have to believe it. And a lot of people say, oh, the Outreau case is like the epitome of like believing the children no matter what. And it is very controversial to listen to children's testimonies. Like, there's a lot of cases that are controversial because of that. But at the end of the day, like, the reality is this case is the best example of children's confessions being completely dismissed and disrespected, because everything was riding on Myriam Badaoui, this woman. Like, how could you say that this case was like all about the children's word and how it had so much value, when at the end of the day, it almost didn't matter what they said, because ultimately, the second she said that the adults were innocent, that was it. That was over. So very interesting case, I guess. Very sad case. I will be taking a little break from true crime after this video. It was hard to research, so the next video won't be true crime, but I will be back with some true crime content. If that's what you're into, please keep an eye out for future videos. I do believe that in this case, Thierry Delay is the most guilty person. That's my opinion. But because Myriam Badaoui had such a heavy role in the trials, she had the worst reputation. And don't get me wrong, she is a horrible person, but I think she got way more hate than he got. And I think he deserved just as much hate. I don't think she deserved less hate. I think he deserved just as much, if not more. That's it. I'm gonna go take a bath or something. I hope you enjoyed this case. I mean, obviously, there's nothing nice about this case, but I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please comment your thoughts down below, obviously. Let me know what you think about all of this. If you have any cases you'd like me to cover, please let me know, and I will do my best to cover them. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.